Greetings, everyone. This is Virtuous Roots, where we cultivate virtue to bring it to our home and yours. And I'm Thomas McCuddy.
And I'm Thomas Quackenbush.
And I'm Nick Wiegand. And tonight we have a topic that was particularly spawned by a post that we had seen on social media. And it really kind of revolves around the idea of should parents force their children to interact with adults or others? I mean, because I think this is going to extend even past should parents force their children to interact with adults if they don't want to?
Mhm.
And I know that I know parents that don't make their kids talk to anyone because they're shy or they don't wanna. But then I know parents who will subject their children to anyone.
Mhm.
And so I think we have the excess and defect here.
Mhm.
So what is the underlying virtue that we're mainly going to be talking about today?
I think, and this is where it gets tricky because there's several
Mhm.
that come into play. I think it's in the category of justice because it's what we owe other people. Do we owe people a response? And if we didn't, this wouldn't even be an issue. Like we wouldn't even be really
Right.
talking about it. Wouldn't be much concern. Like just again, do whatever you feel like. That's often how parents will treat it. Do whatever you feel, but justice is not based upon the feelings. It's giving what is due, giving what is owed, and that sort of trickles down into the idea of really in terms of respect, and it could and wrap around the ideas of like the friendliness that is owed to people.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and
You
again,
you probably got some humility in there as well, because I mean it takes a sense of humility to put yourself, at a level in which you feel as if you owe others.
right, that humility, and see, and this is why the complexity, humility falls under temperance, and because we either enjoy people's praises or, we want to withdraw. I think that's what creates this issue is because if I don't feel like talking to somebody, or again, if I feel better or I don't feel like I don't deserve whatever it is, if those feelings are there, that's what's going to draw me to speak to somebody or not,
Right.
that I'm gonna be compelled to, or I'm going to shy away. Like, oh, I don't think that I'm at their level, so I can't speak to them. It's funny that this happened with my wife recently. There was two younger ladies who were afraid to approach her. Like they were scared to talk to her. So she was like, "What in the world?" It's like she was sitting there thinking. I was like, "Well, one of them I don't normally talk to, so I got to understand." But I think what happens with kids, and where I've seen this, and this has been over a number of years, seeing different articles about this and how parents are like, I never ever make my kids talk to somebody that they don't want to.
Right.
And
And now look at culture and society at this point, right? But no, I think that was prevailing for a while is, not forcing your children to do things that they don't want to do, or especially this. And then I think it has moved the needle in our culture to where, there's quite a few in the younger generation that won't even look at you. I mean, I interviewed a young man the other day for a job, and like he couldn't sit still, he couldn't look at me, he couldn't even, like, it was the worst interview I've ever experienced in my life. And needless to say, I didn't hire him, but he did not have the skills to talk to me.
mm,
And he was, late teens, did not have the skills to talk to me.
mm,
And so I think his parents probably did not force him to do that, would
mm,
be my guess. So I know that there's an element, especially this particular post, there's an element of protection here. Is that I think the element was I'm not going to force them to hug family members if they feel uncomfortable. And in the culture that we're in, I personally think it is the parent's responsibility to protect the child to the greatest extent possible.
mm,
Where do we draw this line?
mm,
Well, and I think with Thomas, when he's bringing up that comment, like the never ever aspect, like I'm never ever gonna do something. It seems like there's situations that, because this is a prudence issue too. It's justice, and we want to, give to others what is owed to them, but also a prudence issue where we're trying to assess the situation. There's people that we need to protect our children from. So obviously, we're not going to just do the other extreme and be like, well, you're going to just be interactive with anybody you encounter. I've seen children just like, they just go up to anybody, and they have no problem just starting engaging conversations, and you don't know what kind of person that they're talking to at times, and that's the other extreme. And so you got to teach your children to kind of like, well, there's some people that they want to interact with, don't want to be interacted with, and so there's the two extremes. You either say never ever or always, and you kind of have to judge the situation for what it is, and recognize the bigger picture when it comes to this because like that young man, that whatever happened in his life, whatever was not done, or what they allowed to do, it's infecting him. He didn't get the job.
Yeah.
Like, and it just like, we want to like, and I've heard other accounts where just this, because now it starts bleeding into a fortitude issue. Like they lack the courage to be able to go up like as adults and talk to people. And I know that even in I forgot where it was I was reading, but there was these kids were brilliant, and they got into these programs, the science programs, and they had these research projects or whatever, and they were too afraid to actually like apply themselves. And one of the hardest things for the instructor to do is get these kids out of that bubble and actually engage with these bigger ideas and use that intellect that God has given them for his glory and for their own good. Because it's almost like they lack this social skill that needs to be developed alongside the intellect, alongside all this education, so that they're able to properly use this.
Well, I think the key there is it's not the instructor's job
Yeah.
to teach this, right?
Yeah, because it should already be.
It is us.
It's just a parent's job to do that, because their job is just to, we're going to take this kid who has this potential, and I'm going to try to realize that potential in them, but part of that journey is their own. It's not the teacher can do all of it.
I think a lot of us probably decide this based on our childhoods, would be my guess.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
I mean, I know I definitely wanted my children to interact with adults on a regular basis. It was a positive experience from me, but I would react pretty aggressively to adults who wanted to push my kids to anger, to tease them, because I loved my uncle, but it was a running joke in the family. He would not stop till I cried. And so growing up, every time I knew I was around this particular uncle, he would not stop till I cried. Now that's probably how he knew how to interact, and that's fine, and I'm mad at him for it. But I carried that with me to parenthood. When someone wants to tease my child, especially an adult, God help them, because he's about going to be the only one who can. I do not I protect my children. So yes, I forced them to interact, but I did not allow other adults to push them to the point of anger just because they found it funny.
Yeah.
And I know in churches we have people who do that, in families we have people who do that. So there's got to be, there's the nuance here. There's the nuance of the conversation. We owe them the protection.
Yeah.
If we are going to put them into position to where they're vulnerable.
Right. And I think so in the vein of what's owed, because again, we owe to protect them, but we also owe it to our kids to teach them to give what is owed. And this is why
True.
the virtue
Yeah.
of gratitude comes in. So I think in some of the concrete places we can plant our feet, gratitude is a bit more concrete in terms of what's owed. When something's done for you, you should express a thank you. Look them in the eye.
When
say
you're
thank you.
addressed.
When
and
you're
questioned.
addressed and you're given these things and whatever's done, that's something that we sort of focused on with our kids. Look at them. Say the thank you. Like it is much more directly owed. Now, how much friendship is owed, and this is where I think we talked about sometimes, what if a child feels uncomfortable around somebody or doesn't like them or something like that? Friendship is a little bit more malleable, because you let's not be rude, but you don't have to be buddy.
Yeah.
And that's where prudence comes in. And I think that's why I like what you're pointing out, Thomas, that when we say that we're never ever or that we're always, I think we run into, with this kind of issue with interaction, there is a level of prudence that goes in, that we need to understand what kind of situation, and we don't want to draw those lines too broadly, because otherwise we do run into unnecessary offense, or we end up damaging relations or the kids, such that, again, if they're always being pushed and they're always like, no, I'm gonna in every situation, and you have a child that's naturally introverted,
Mm-hmm.
then you're gonna build up resentment
Yeah.
real fast, where introverts and extroverts are gonna operate a little differently, and recognizing what kind of child you have, but to say, you know what you should always want to do is the right thing in those situations. That requires you to look at and
I,
take the biblical principle and
I,
apply that.
I think these are biblical principles, but there's, before we were started, I was looking for a specific verse that kind of wrapped it up, and I don't know if I found one, right? Like I didn't find one that's just like, yeah, make your kids hug their uncles, like, there was no thou shalt, right?
Greet each other with a holy kiss.
Yeah.
Well, there is greet each other with a holy kiss. I like that one, and I like to say that at church because then people get freaked out because they know me well enough to know that there's potential there. Like it could happen. So 1 Peter 5:5. Likewise, you who are younger, be subject to the elders. Clothe yourselves, all of you, with humility toward one another, for God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this isn't particularly talking about children, and this is talking about how we are to act in the church towards those who are more spiritually mature and who are placed in that position of honor, that we should show this deference. We should show humility. The only way to teach that, though, is by instilling it in our children at a younger age. So I think these ideas are biblical. No, I don't think. I mean, they are. These ideas are biblical in nature. And so if we're talking, and I think we're all in agreement that yes, we encourage, force, however, cajole, whatever word we want to use, our children to respond, to react, to interact with these adults, even if they don't want to. How much respect should go along with that? Because we're all pastors. I'm assuming you've experienced it. I know you've experienced it.
Mm-hmm.
But children are absolutely rude to us.
Mm-hmm.
And their parents think it's hilarious. And so children will make ridiculous little jokes because it's funny. They will say rude things. They will be disrespectful. And the parent will stand idly by. And I know in a church, like, I probably put up with a whole lot more for myself, but I will absolutely not put up with one doing it to my wife, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I will have my lines. What is owed if we're going to force this? How much should we then control the interaction in the same way?
Well, and I think in the case of, and to be clear, not all the kids.
No,
are like that.
not all the kids.
To be clear,
No, not even most of the kids.
But
Just
just
had those instances.
But
yeah.
just some of the. I had a kid kick me in the shin
for
at my last church. I had a kid kick me and left a welt, and the parent thought it was funny. And I didn't chuck the kid, but like I thought about it.
So I will say for our listeners, when I do enjoy the hat I bought in South Africa. I brought it back. Generally, I get great compliments, but one of the first comments was from a teenager, like, "That's a dumb hat." I was like, "What? What in the world?" So we bring all this up, not to just kind of air our grievances, but there is that element of we're watching this around some kids, and they seem to lack that respect.
Yeah.
They seem to lack the prudence. Where do you draw the line between I'm being funny and humorous, which this is actually a virtue in itself. Like there's a fancy Greek word for it, but we'll just call it the virtue of humor, that you don't want to be like completely just sad-faced and frowny and boring, but you also don't want to be a great English word to fall into buffoonery, where you're being foolish and ridiculous. And I think that's what happens sometimes with the kids. They don't know how to draw those lines. And so it does spill over a little bit into, you've pushed too far. You shouldn't have said that. And so I think in terms of the parents guiding that and taking those moments, because I do this with my boys, that when they push too far, they say something they shouldn't, I engage that immediately. I'm like, that's rude. We don't say things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And and sometimes I'll hear them talking, and particularly with my oldest, I've done this where I'll stop him. And I'm like, that right there, you shouldn't say things like that. You owe it to your brothers to respect them more. You owe it to your mother. You owe it to whoever to, try to gauge them, try to guide them so they have a sense of it. And I think that's why this topic is important, because it's not a simple formula. I think that goes back down to when we say the always and the never. We want to make it a simple formula, and it's not so simple.
Right.
And
Well,
I
I mean,
think,
what you just described with your oldest,
Mhm.
even though he was interacting with his younger brother, and when it goes right back to that verse, is clothe yourselves, all of you, with humility toward one another, for God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble.
Mhm.
You're teaching your 15-year-old that humility, and to set aside that pride, because I think what I have found, at least amongst adults, is when adults are rude and cutting and biting and mean, they're always proud. Like
Mhm.
it's always associated with a side of
I think
of
it's
pride
yeah,
of pride
absolutely.
along with it.
Hmm.
And so I think what you're I mean you're tying it you're tying it right in, and it's a good example. But then we take that, and we force it in our own household. But then what do we owe outside of our household? What do we owe others? Because that's what you kept saying is,
Mhm.
what do we owe them?
Mhm.
And is it, do we owe them, or do we owe God? Do we owe the teachers at the school? Like, where, how do we teach this prudence is really what it boils down, this wisdom as to how do we teach our children what is owed?
But well, I was just thinking as Thomas was as he was speaking, because a lot of what you're doing, because kind of especially with some of our introverted, my older one's more introverted than my middle one, and so like I you have the debriefs and you explain to them kind of why, like especially you take those situations and and you recognize that maybe the way they interacted was a little like me they should be a little bit more like friendly with that person, not so like whatever, but not just like chastise them, because it might be very the simple fact that they're just shy and they're a little nervous in those situations. But the idea is that we want to build up their confidence, and so that they become more confident, and they're able to talk to adults, because that's a good thing, I would say. And I think just being honest with them, and recognizing the good in, we talk about that. You want to do what's good. Being, like when people talk to you and they address you, you have a certain level of, there's an expectation that you're gonna respond in a certain, at least it doesn't have to be over the top, but at least in a manner that's respectful, like where you're gonna answer their questions, and you're going to look them in the eye, like you were saying, because those things need to be instilled in them. And I think just the process of just explaining that to them, because it's not self-evident, especially if your disposition is an introvert, like you're just like, why do I need to do this? Well, it's because I'm introverted myself, and I had, it took me time to really feel confident, but now that I've built relationships with people that I normally wouldn't. Now I'm out, my kids, like, they see me, and this is another part of way of building it. I interact easily and regularly with people that are just, go to the store or go to these different places, and I strike up a conversation. My kids are there with me, and I include them in the conversation intentionally, so they can see, because especially as we were supposed to, like, me bringing the gospel to folks and explaining to them who Jesus is. You got to be able to strike those conversations. We have to have that kind of proactive aspect of this, not just when we're addressed, but being able to strike up a conversation in a manner that's appropriate for that setting.
Right. Well, one of the things that you said, you called it a debrief in the Army. We called it after action reviews. And you and I have a lot of them. I always come to you and I say, like, was that handled well? Did I come across as I had intended to come across? And sometimes Thomas will say, you came across a little harsh, and I will say, good, I came across how I intended to come
That's
across.
exactly how I
Other times it is, ooh, I did not mean to do that. But it's interesting though, because I've implemented that in my life. But I think that's a really good tool to implement with our children in just about every situation. So
Yeah.
I think it's an incredible tool that we can use afterward, just to say, hey, this is what happened. This is what I heard. This is what I saw. What did you hear? What did you see? And then this is how next time we
Yep.
can do better, or this is affirming, this is how well you did.
Yeah.
I think that gets back into helping them get the sense of what to do, because I know you mentioned like, well, what exactly is owed? And I think that there's certain little things like, particularly here in the southern United States, um, we tend to address people with some sort of honorific like Mr. and Miss.
Hmm.
You don't get that in the northern part of the United States. And people always talk about when they come down into the South, Southern hospitality.
Yeah.
Like people are so nice. Like I've had this conversations at airports, but they're sometimes people's first exposure into the Southern United States. They're just in awe. They just can't believe it, and it was so lovely.
I
They were
feel like
shocked.
I feel like we're getting back to the one of those other conversations.
Well, okay, so to steer it back, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's an element where when we teach our children these basic principles of show hospitality, show gratitude, to, and here's what it looks like. That's where they can start to get that feel. Because with my oldest, there were times if I tell him, okay, when somebody comes to your birthday party, you need to thank them. He's like, okay, thank all my guests. Got it. Check. And then when they come, he's just like, oh, thank you so much. And smothers them. I'm like, okay, dial it back, you know? And so he's like, yeah, thanks. I was like, okay. It's not that clear formula always. And that's why I think that there's room for teaching the sense of it, having that basic idea when, speak to someone who's, speaking to you, say please and thank you. Like those are some of the
Manners.
rules, the manners that are brought in. We in a sense owe this friendliness to people, and knowing when to do that, knowing when not. That's what it means to be. There's a word for it. We talk about being like socially mature. To have that, I think it goes back to in this generation that's coming up, they haven't had that, and I think it shows. And there's way more articles right now on just the problem that is in the workforce
Hmm.
because they don't have that sense of social propriety and how to respond to people appropriately. And so that's why I didn't realize that had happened to you with the interview, because again, I see every day articles about this,
Yeah.
and they like the most recent one is that Generation Z is not fit for the workforce, is the level that these articles are. And I think it goes back to, in this sense, well, what's the underlying cause? And it goes back to they haven't been taught how to interact. And I think it's important to put it on parents' radars that, just be conscientious about it. Just
Yeah.
almost examine, how does your child react to adults and others? Are you cognizant of this? And is there some guidance that needs to be given?
Is your child a snarky little smart aleck,
Mm-hmm.
or is your child a respectful individual who responds well and
Mm,
appropriately, right? And then there's all the in betweens.
indeed.
I found in my life, because I didn't grow up in a church, and when I had my kids initially, they weren't in the church, but going to church, and like that's another good place, because we talked about protecting our children. At least at church, we're seeing these same people every day, where there's adults and children intermixing, and it's a good place for your children to practice, that sort of talking, because we were interacting and being intentional in those interactions. And I found that since we started going to church and when we became believers, that my kids became more socially active, because now they're used to it every week, and then they're looking forward to those interactions, not just with their friends, but with just everybody that they encounter. And it really brought them out of their shell. It brought them into this place where now we're able to, it goes beyond our family. And now we're going into our church, another, safe environment, so to speak. And I find that that's a good place to practice these.
Well, I just want I agree with you. I just we just need to remain diligent. We owe
Yeah.
our children that protection,
Mhm.
and we know that all churches are not safe
Exact-
environments.
yeah,
All you
not
got to
all
do
of
is
it, but
all you got to do is open a website, right? And so,
true.
gentlemen, thanks for the conversation. I think this is something that we need to focus on,
Mhm.
that we need to develop in our children. But I think we need to realize that we owe them the protection that their innocent little hearts deserve,
Yes, sir.
Mhm.
and continue our watch and our diligence.
Yes.
You can find us on familiesofvirtue.com, and this podcast, Virtuous Roots, can be found on all streaming platforms. Be blessed, and we'll talk to you next time.